this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
This is Red Pilled America. Bitcoin has been one of the most fascinating and controversial developments in the history of monetary technology. When Red Pilled America did our first deep dive into Bitcoin called Crypto in July 2019, each Bitcoin hovered around $9,000. When we did our second deep dive called Crypto Revisited in January 2023, it was at about $16,000. Today, as I record this, it's hovering at almost $65,000 per coin, an almost 7 times increase in 7 years. That seems impressive until you realize that over the past 7 months, the value of a Bitcoin has been cut by almost half its all-time high of $126,000. Next week on July 29th, the Fed chairman is expected to provide big news that will impact the economy, Wall Street, and Bitcoin. So to provide a refresher, over the next week we'll be republishing both our deep dives on crypto. Where is crypto going? After listening to these 6 episodes, tell us what you think. And don't forget to become a Backstage subscriber where you get ad-free access to our entire back catalog of episodes. Just go to redpilledamerica.com and click Join in the top of the menu. Now on with the show. If you haven't heard about Bitcoin by now, you must be living under a rock.
Bitcoin. That was the moment that I wanted to use Bitcoin.
I own Bitcoin in my hedge fund.
Do you think this is a currency that's really going to work eventually?
Well, I think it is working.
This internet cash has become all the buzz. But recently, the hype has taken a different turn. Many powerful people seem to fear digital currencies.
I look for colleagues to join with me in introducing a bill to outlaw cryptocurrency.
With all these economists, bankers, and politicians raising a red flag about the emergence of digital cash, it got us to thinking, is Bitcoin dangerous to America? I'm Patrick Corelchi.
And I'm Adriana Cortez.
And this is Red Pilled America, a storytelling show.
This is not another talk show covering the day's news. We are all about telling stories.
Stories Hollywood doesn't want you to hear.
Stories the media mocks. Stories about everyday Americans that the globalists ignore.
You could think of Red Pilled America as audio documentaries, and we promise only one thing. The truth. Welcome to Red Pilled America. Is Bitcoin dangerous to America? The topic has been popping up more and more on our screens, but the speculation was sent into overdrive after President Trump condemned Bitcoin and other new digital currencies.
Crypto is being talked about. The president actually weighed in and tweeted about cryptocurrencies last night. He wrote in part this: "I'm not a fan of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which are not money and whose value is highly volatile based on thin air," he writes. "Unregulated crypto assets can facilitate unlawful behavior, including drug trade and other illegal activity," writes the president.
To get to the bottom of Bitcoin, we'll first look into the origin of this tech phenomenon. We'll talk to a few experts on its emergence and impact on America. And we'll hear a story about the lengths to which the United States government has gone to halt its growth. But I want to warn you here before we get started. At first glance, the topic of Bitcoin seems complicated. It has its own language and challenges the way we think of money. That said, if you stay with us, you'll know more about Bitcoin than most. And today that's vital, because some say the disruptive technology driving this new phenomenon could even be bigger than the internet. Understanding Bitcoin has now become mandatory.
A lot of people say that in Bitcoin or internet terms, we're still in like the 1980s.
What would happen, for example, if Gulf nations, rather than trading oil in dollars, moved to Bitcoin? That would, I think, destroy America as a global empire.
You know, governments are worried. However, I don't know that anybody can prevent it.
They needed a scapegoat, and Ross was their scapegoat. And I personally think it was because of the Bitcoin.
Everyone is talking about Bitcoin, but what is it? Simply put, it's a new currency system. When we think of money, our minds typically conjure up images of greenbacks, US dollars, that physical paper money we sometimes carry in our wallets.
Bitcoin is also considered money, but it's a brand new form of currency that only comes in electronic form. There is no physical coin or bill. This kind of digital money is called cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to think about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, all of which do stem from Bitcoin originally, is best thought of as internet cash.
That's Billy Bambra, a freelance journalist that's been covering cryptocurrencies since 2012.
Just like you have cash that you use in a store, Bitcoin or other forms of cryptocurrencies are or could be considered cash that you use on the internet. So it's digital cash. It doesn't fit quite into the same definitions of a traditional currency. It doesn't fit quite into the definitions of a traditional commodity like gold. It's somewhere in between. The exact use case has not quite been pinned down yet because it is something entirely new.
Internet cash is a brand new disruptive development in currency. The history of money helps illustrate this fact.
Before we had currency, people had to rely on the barter system, where you would trade something of value that you possessed for something of value that someone else possessed. For example, your stockpile of furs were a form of currency to purchase, say, a bale of wheat that you needed. But often there was a problem. What you had of value wasn't always what someone else wanted in a barter deal. Person A may have had a bale of wheat that you wanted, but they didn't need furs, so the trade wouldn't happen. You'd have to find out what person A wanted. Let's say they needed wood. Then you'd have to find person B that had wood and trade your furs with that person, assuming they wanted furs. Then you could take your newly acquired wood and go back to person A and trade your wood for their wheat. That is, assuming they still had the wheat. As you can see, bartering was a bit complicated, and as societies grew, it became even more difficult. So a need for currency arose in order to facilitate trading.
Throughout history, people have used all kinds of physical currency.
There's hardly anything that hasn't been used for money.
That's the late and famed economist, Milton Friedman.
Rock salt in Ethiopia, brass rings in West Africa, cowrie shells in Uganda, crocodile money in Malaysia. Absurd, isn't it? Even a toy cannon. Anything can be used as money.
Most pre-industrial revolution cultures decided on some form of currency to facilitate trade.
The most important thing with a currency, for example, the Indian shell wampum, which were basically beads, is that it be limited in supply. What limited the supply of shell wampum was it was difficult to make.
That's economist Peter Morisi, professor emeritus at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business.
Anybody could make it in the Indian community. However, it took a lot of time and effort.
It's that time and effort in creating the shell wampum that gave it value to the Indian people.
For thousands of years, gold and silver have been used as money. We've mined these precious metals and forged them into coins, each branded with an official stamp by some trusted third party to guarantee their purity. The work that went into mining it, refining it, and pressing it into coins helped establish the value of the coin. Aside from the few commercial uses, gold and silver didn't necessarily have any intrinsic value. They had value because everyone agreed that they had value.
You know, money is based on faith. People need to understand that. Because after all, back in the days when we used gold, what made gold valuable? The answer is people made it valuable. They decided it was valuable and would exchange it for goods.
But as time passed, the use of gold and silver coins as currency became inefficient. People needed to trade in denominations smaller than the value of each coin. They needed a form of currency that was easier to handle. So, in part, to solve this problem, governments began issuing paper currency.
In the United States, for many years, our currency, the US dollar, was backed by gold. This was known as the gold standard. Our central bank, called the Federal Reserve, would issue paper money with the total of all US dollars in circulation representing the physical amount of gold held by the Treasury Department. The paper itself had no intrinsic value, but it was a form of accounting that represented an actual portion of gold. In other words, the dollar was just an accounting system to keep track of how much gold everyone owned. The Federal Reserve could not just print up extra paper money at will. It was generally limited by the amount of the precious metal held by the Treasury. But that officially changed in 1971.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Many believe the United States had unofficially abandoned the gold standard in the 1960s, when our government printed money to pay for the Vietnam War and President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs. But in 1971, President Nixon made leaving the gold standard official.
Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
Of course, that wasn't even remotely true. Today, the value of the dollar has plummeted by 84% since Nixon made that announcement. Again, Billy Bambraugh.
So the US system at the moment and many other monetary systems around the world are based on fractional reserve lending and on central banks deciding how much money to print, when to print it, how to manage the economy.
From 1971 on, the U.S. dollar was no longer backed by gold, but instead it was backed by a promise from the United States government. Its value being derived by, among other things, how stable the government is and how much money is in circulation. The U.S. dollar became just an accounting system of value backed by nothing but a promise, with the banks acting as a trusted third party that records the economic transactions in a ledger, like our bank statements and credit card transaction statements. With gold no longer restraining how much money was in circulation, the central bank was free to create U.S. dollars out of thin air.
Today, every major country has this type of currency system. Because of the stability of the United States, our currency became very powerful throughout the world because people trust that they can safely hold their property in the U.S. dollar without their assets losing value. Modern-day Venezuela, on the other hand, is unstable, which is why you see their paper currency littering their streets. It's worthless. But even with the stability of our government, in the early 1980s, some began to question our currency system and the government's ability to monitor almost every financial transaction. At the time, U.S. cryptographer David Chaum expressed the idea of an anonymous electronic money to avoid Big Brother's watchful eye. A cryptographer is someone that designs safe ways to transfer information electronically without the information being intercepted or duplicated by a third party.
A movement began to form around this desire for privacy. The people drawn to the movement were called cypherpunks, cipher referring to a secret way of writing, what is referred to in the digital world as encryption.
In the early 90s, these cypherpunks coalesced around an electronic mailing list to share their ideas, and the movement slowly grew. People like WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and lesser-known names like U.S. cryptographer Hal Finney were cypherpunks. By 1997, the originator of the concept of cryptocurrency, David Chaum, secured some venture capital to start an internet currency he called DigiCash. Other cypherpunks also entered the ring, each attempting to create their own online money that was as secure and anonymous as cash in the physical world. However, the idea didn't spread. Corporations and merchants weren't so keen on the concept of anonymous internet cash. They liked capturing your data from traceable electronic transactions like credit cards. But perhaps more importantly, consumers weren't lining up to use digital money. David Chaum said at the time, quote, "As the web grew, the average level of sophistication of users dropped. It was hard to explain the importance of privacy to them," end quote. By the end of 1998, David Chaum's DigiCash filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The other electronic currency outfits failed as well. People hadn't yet understood the precious data they were giving up to big tech companies with every internet transaction. And besides, in the late 90s, it was easy for everyone to open an account with a bank or a credit card company. They welcomed everyone. No one was being banned from these financial institutions, so the demand for a new internet cash was near zero. Still, by the turn of the millennium, even with the failed attempts at a cryptocurrency, a few forward thinkers saw the eventual development of internet cash that was completely separate from the US dollar. Again, Milton Friedman.
So that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet.
The race for a cryptocurrency was largely shelved by the early 2000s, but little did the cypherpunks know that their passion was about to be given a rebirth by a mysterious anonymous figure, a figure that would develop a disruptive new technology that could threaten the government's monopoly on printing money.
The headlines, they move on, but the heartache and the terror, they do not. Iran and its terrorist proxies are continuing to target Israel. Hezbollah continues its attacks in the north, forcing families to live under constant threat. But Israel is not only defending her people, she is standing on the front lines against terror that threatens us all. Even when the news crews leave, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, they remain. Every day, they are on the ground, providing life-saving aid. Now, near Israel's border with Lebanon, a Hezbollah drone recently struck the home of Yelena. Widowed earlier this year and living alone, she was trapped inside by the blast. Thankfully, she was not injured, but she remained displaced. It's hard these days, she says, but I don't want to leave. Well, as Christians, we are called to stand with God's people and pray for those defending Israel and protecting the freedoms we hold dear. I want you to join the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews in praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for the soldiers, families, and civilians carrying the burden of this fight right now. Visit prayifcj.org. That's prayifcj.org.
Welcome back. I'm Adriana Cortez. So the race for a digital cash or cryptocurrency had been largely shelved by the early 2000s. Corporations and merchants preferred credit card transactions where they could capture data on their customers. People also hadn't yet understood the attack on their online privacy. As a result, there was no demand for cryptocurrencies, but an event of global proportions was about to give rise to a mysterious character that would breathe new life into the idea.
This is going to be one of the watershed days in financial markets history.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets. The Dow tumbled more than 500 points after two pillars of the street tumbled over the weekend. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old firm, filed for bankruptcy.
I don't think anyone really expected a bank as big as Lehman to be in a position that it's in now.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
With the fall of Lehman Brothers in the throes of the 2008 financial crisis, many Americans lost faith in the United States monetary system. Cypherpunks began revisiting the idea of a digital currency divorced from the centralized Federal Reserve, the system that many felt threw the global economy into chaos. On October 31, 2008, in the midst of the crisis, an unknown web user, or perhaps a group of users, going by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, wrote a white paper entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and published it to the web address bitcoin.org. Satoshi then posted a link to the document on a cryptography mailing list, stating, quote, "I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party," end quote. Satoshi was proposing a new form of internet cash. It was the Napster of currency. The system Satoshi developed was a decentralized currency system called Bitcoin, one that eliminated the need for banks as the middleman. Again, Billy Bambraugh.
Because of the 2008 financial crisis in which Bitcoin was created and can be seen as a catalyst for interest in Bitcoin, people have decided that perhaps this monetary system is not the best one.
As we mentioned earlier, our U.S. currency is just an accounting system, with third parties like banks, credit card companies, and other financial institutions all recording transactions and keeping track of value. In one way or another, each of these third parties fall under our central bank, the Federal Reserve. Satoshi designed a system that replaced this centralized banking system with a decentralized collection of computers that automated the accounting the banks performed. This automated system, known as the blockchain, records electronic transactions on a public ledger residing on thousands of computers all across the world in a way that is near impossible to hack. The system removed a costly middleman like Bank of America, Visa, and PayPal that deducts large fees. This blockchain technology also partially anonymized every transaction, keeping everyone involved out of the watchful eye of the government. Satoshi Nakamoto created the first internet cash. Instead of shells or gold coins or paper dollars, this new internet cash system used bitcoins. The technology was revolutionary. When I send an email to someone, both I and the person receiving it have a copy of the email. Satoshi's technology devised a way to send a digital object, the Bitcoin, to someone without leaving a copy with the sender. So when I send a Bitcoin to someone to purchase an item or pay for a service, I no longer have a copy of the Bitcoin. The person I sent it to now has the possession of that digital coin. It's handed off just like cash is. The transaction is recorded into a public ledger through an automated system of computers throughout the world, removing the middleman and the fees they may charge. A key of the system is that the computers that perform the computation behind these transactions are rewarded with Bitcoin. Just like when people mine mountains in the hopes of finding gold, these computers compete to perform the computation of Bitcoin transactions in hopes of being rewarded with Bitcoins from the system. As a result, these computers are called miners. Satoshi released the blockchain computer code that operated this new internet cash system on January 3, 2009, and the first transaction was recorded just a few days later when Satoshi Nakamoto sent 10 bitcoins to a member of the cypherpunk movement, Hal Finney. A key feature of this Bitcoin system is that there is a limit to the amount of bitcoins in circulation. Unlike the US dollar that can be printed by the Federal Reserve at will, the maximum number of bitcoins that will ever exist is 21 million. Satoshi forced the Bitcoin system to mimic the limit set up by the gold standard, where the number of US dollars were confined to the amount of gold in the Treasury Department. This is a very important point. Today, as the Federal Reserve continues to print money, the US dollar loses purchasing power over time because there are more dollars in circulation. If you think of dollars as shares of stock in the United States, the more dollars that there are, the smaller the share of the United States you own. So the value of a US dollar decreases from year to year. That's why the price of products continues to rise every year. It's because your dollars are losing value. Satoshi wanted to solve this problem of inflation by limiting the number of bitcoins that could ever be in circulation to a finite number, 21 million. So from year to year, the value of Bitcoin will not be diluted like the US dollar. The first known commercial transaction using Bitcoin occurred in 2010 when a programmer named Laszlo Hanyecz bought 2 Papa John's pizzas. The price tag for the 2 pies? 10,000 Bitcoins. In December 2020, the same amount of Bitcoin would trade for roughly $230 million. In the first couple years of Bitcoin, few merchants were adopting the cryptocurrency. It needed a kickstart, one that could prove Bitcoin's ability to actually serve as digital cash. That would come with the creation of an online marketplace that would not only prove the legitimacy of cryptocurrency, but would also show how much the government feared this new internet money. The first broad audience to see the potential of crypto was the libertarians. They believed in small government, liberty, and free markets. They wanted an end to the war on drugs and saw the Federal Reserve as the key culprit behind the 2008 financial crisis. One of their leaders, Ron Paul, called for an end to the Fed and a return to the financial system backed by gold.
There is no authority in the Constitution authorizing a central bank, which means there should be no Federal Reserve System.
But even as it became abundantly obvious that our central banking system played a primary role in the financial crisis, it also became clear that Washington, D.C. was not going to end the Federal Reserve's reign. The emergence of Bitcoin provided a new revolutionary way forward. If the Federal Reserve could not be removed, it could just be ignored. If people adopted cryptocurrency, they could make financial transactions privately between two consenting adults without a banking system as the middleman. Just like paper cash. Cryptocurrency promised true liberty, a paramount principle for libertarians.
I got into cryptocurrency very early on.
That's Curtis Green, author of Silk Road Takedown. After the financial crisis, Curtis was, like most middle Americans, in a bad financial place. Jobs were not easy to come by. The Utah native had a bad back, so work options for Curtis were limited. He began looking for online work and possible investment opportunities that could produce a quick return. That's when he ran across a discussion of Bitcoin on a web forum.
So I thought, well, this is interesting. So I started following it a little bit, and I wasn't into it big time. It intrigued me, and Bitcoin talk was up at the time, had just started, and that's where 99.9% of all Bitcoin discussion was taken. So I was on there quite a bit early on, and as I was reading the discussions, I learned more of what it can do, the benefits. I learned about how it's a ledger and how I just got educated. So I saw this Bitcoin as being a way of digital money. They solved a huge problem, the double spend.
The double spend problem is perhaps the first barrier blocking most people from taking cryptocurrency seriously. An idea embedded in all of us is that digital files can easily be copied. So if someone can copy a digital Bitcoin, it would allow a coin to be spent more than once, or the double spend. So how could internet cash not be counterfeited? Satoshi Nakamoto solved the double spend problem with Bitcoin.
But Satoshi, the developer of Bitcoin, came up, I don't know how he figured it out, but he figured out how to stop this double spend. So if I have one Bitcoin and I send it to you, that Bitcoin goes to you and it can't be duplicated. So to me, that was fascinating.
The more Curtis dug into Bitcoin and the blockchain technology driving it, the more he was sold on the system.
But as I started learning, it intrigued me more and more and more. I'm like, man, this could solve a lot of problems. And, the unbanked, being able to have control of your own money instead of having one bank or one person or company be in control, where you can basically take back that control. And that's why it's revolutionary, and it's going to change the way we do things. I put blockchain, and I use blockchain instead of cryptocurrencies, because blockchain is the technology behind cryptocurrency. That's why I put blockchain technology up there to the invention of the cell phone, to the invention of the computer. That's what it's going to do to help liberate us and help us with our daily lives in the future.
To try and make money from this new movement in currency, he set up his computer to become a miner, configuring his hard drive to help with the computations behind Bitcoin transactions. When his computer performed this computational task successfully, he received a reward, a small amount of Bitcoin. As time went on, he started to generate some income from this, and he wanted to connect with other enthusiasts of the cryptocurrency.
And then all of a sudden, I was looking for more places to talk about Bitcoin. Well, the Silk Road site came up.
But what Curtis didn't know at the time was that the website Silk Road was about to become a target of some of the most powerful institutions in the world.
The headlines, they move on, but the heartache and the terror, they do not. Iran and its terrorist proxies are continuing to target Israel. Hezbollah continues its attacks in the north, forcing families to live under constant threat. But Israel is not only defending her people, she is standing on the front lines against terror that threatens us all. Even when the news crews leave the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, they remain. Every day, they are on the ground providing life-saving aid. Now, near Israel's border with Lebanon, a Hezbollah drone recently struck the home of Yelena. Widowed earlier this year and living alone, she was trapped inside by the blast. Thankfully, she was not injured, but she remained displaced. It's hard these days, she says, but I don't want to leave. Well, as Christians, we are called to stand with God's people and pray for those defending Israel and protecting the freedoms we hold dear. I want you to join the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews in praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for the soldiers, families, and civilians carrying the burden of this fight right now. Visit prayifcj.org. That's prayifcj.org.
Do you want to hear Red Pilled America stories ad-free? Then become a Backstage subscriber. Just log on to redpilledamerica.com and click Join in the top menu. Join today and help us save America one story at a time.
Welcome back to Red Pilled America. So as Curtis became more fascinated by the potential of Bitcoin, he began searching for other places to talk about the cryptocurrency. The website Silk Road began to pop up in online message forums as the place to be for the Bitcoin revolution. Silk Road was an anonymous online marketplace located on what's called the dark web. As we promised at the onset of this show, an entirely new language comes with the discussion of Bitcoin. So before getting into Silk Road, you will need to understand what exactly is the dark web. The dark web is a collection of websites that cannot be found by searching Google or through normal web browsers. It's actually even bigger than the regular internet. The only way to get to a website on the dark web is to use a web browser called the Onion Router, or Tor for short. Think of the dark web as an alternative internet universe invisible to normal web telescopes like Google or browsers like Safari or Chrome. On the regular internet, anyone attempting to track you can easily find your real identity, your physical location, all of the websites you've visited, what kind of computer you're using, your operating system, your browser. They can follow you wherever you go next and gather information all along the way, including even your web logins and credit card info. Your so-called private information is typically out there for anyone to exploit, if they are savvy enough. Tor, on the other hand, allows web users to browse through an encrypted network protecting the privacy and identity of all of its users. It does this with several layers of encryption around the user, hiding all of the user's private information in what could be thought of as a digitally locked box that can only be opened with a key. To add an extra layer of security, when a Tor user punches in an address for a website on the dark web, Tor does not take them directly to the website. The browser instead routes the user through multiple Tor servers all across the world before reaching the intended website, making it near impossible for anyone to track the identity and original address of the user. Websites on the dark web only allow the Tor browser to connect to their site to increase the privacy and security of its users. The dark web allows people to send emails, texts, and other communications privately and anonymously. This is how many journalists speak to whistleblowers and how citizens in countries like China or Iran communicate safely and avoid the censorship of their governments. Using the dark web is how the famed publisher WikiLeaks communicates privately with whistleblowers that give them leaked data, like the DNC emails during the 2016 election. This may lead many people to believe that the dark web is a network set up by anarchists and outlaws. But the Tor browser was actually designed in the mid-1990s by the Navy to protect U.S. intelligence communications online. Tor gave journalists, their sources, dissidents, informants, activists, and others a way to communicate with intelligence agents without fear of being discovered. The Silk Road website that Curtis had heard about on the Bitcoin forums lived on this dark web, so he decided to check it out. What he found out was that Silk Road was an e-commerce website on the dark web like eBay or Amazon, but the site emphasized anonymity and security. To do this, it married Tor and Bitcoin. The only way to visit Silk Road was through the Tor browser, and the only way to purchase products on the site was with Bitcoin, making the entire transaction between the seller, buyer, and website anonymous. And it was also the first massive trial for the use of Bitcoin as internet cash, and it was quickly becoming a phenomenal success. In addition to the marketplace, Silk Road had community forums where people talked and helped each other solve problems. Curtis was drawn to these forums.
They were talking about Bitcoin. They were talking about it was a community, and there was the merchant side where the stuff was sold, and there was the community threads, and that's what is really interesting.
Community boards like these can be found all across the regular internet. Places like Reddit, 4chan, and the comment sections of websites are just message boards where people gather to communicate with like-minded folks. The boards on Silk Road were just the dark web version of those message boards. Curtis became acclimated with the predominant philosophy behind the core users of the site.
Then obviously I looked and I saw, there's these things that, libertarian view where, we should be able to put into our own bodies what we want, as long as we don't harm the third person.
Many on the Silk Road message board were anarcho-capitalists, a form of libertarianism that has a radical view on capitalism, free markets, and the role of the state. They advocate for an elimination of the centralized state that they view as an oppressor that always rules by force and diminishes freedom. The Silk Road administrator himself would post on the message board that the site was founded on libertarian principles. Silk Road users vehemently opposed the war on drugs and felt they should in fact be legalized because, in their view, besides the principle that people should be able to put in their bodies whatever they want, many libertarians on these message boards believed that the war on drugs was unwinnable. They thought legalizing drugs would reduce the violence associated with the street trade. Because of the anonymous nature of Silk Road and the emergence of the internet cash Bitcoin, Silk Road became an extraordinary petri dish to experiment with these libertarian free market ideas. People sold all kinds of items on the site.
Well, you could get anything on there. You could buy shirts, you could buy computers, you could buy software, and it was all legit because one of the rules is you couldn't list something on there that would harm a third person.
But the items that were most prominent on the site, the product that would eventually make Silk Road a national headline, were the drugs.
I think it was 77% of the drugs that were on the site was marijuana. And so the grand majority is a substance that's legal in I don't know how many states now. Even in Utah, they just legalized medical marijuana.
But the other 23% included MDMA or ecstasy, cocaine, heroin, LSD, meth, mushrooms, and other illegal substances. How much of these were actually being sold was unknown, but they were no doubt listed for sale on the site. Enthusiasts of Silk Road believe that the portal itself was helping reduce the violence associated with the procurement of these substances on the streets because the people would be buying them with or without the Silk Road marketplace. Many believed making the transaction anonymous and shipped rather than handed off in some back alley eliminated the potential of violence at the point of sale. Drugs have always been illegally sold online, but the emergence of the dark web and Bitcoin made Silk Road the right idea at the right time for this type of illegal marketplace. Curtis had libertarian leanings and believes people should generally be able to do what they want to do with their body as long as it doesn't hurt another person.
I don't drink, but if I want to drink, I want to be able to drink. As long as I don't get in the car and drive drunk and kill somebody, then what I do in my home is my business.
But he says drugs weren't the reason why he was at the site. It was the community board and their discussions of Bitcoin.
I didn't go there because of drugs. I'm not a drug dealer. I've never taken an illegal street drug in my life. But when I got there, I noticed that people, they weren't talking about that. They were talking more about cryptocurrency.
But even with illegal drugs being sold, the site oddly wasn't anything goes. They had their own community rules. The site administrators didn't allow anything to be sold on the site that harmed innocent people or was necessary to harm innocent people to be brought to market. They prohibited counterfeit money, stolen items, intentional fraud, and pirated software. Hitmen were also not allowed, and neither was child pornography. Anything else that didn't meet these criteria was fair game. The site's community believed Silk Road helped people avoid the regulation of the state, in their eyes an oppressive entity that attempted to control every aspect of people's lives. They thought Silk Road was a way to take back control from the government. While on Silk Road, Curtis obviously saw the drugs for sale and noticed people talking about them on a community board.
I saw that people were buying substances that were very questionable, and so I came up with the idea. It was called harm reduction.
He thought starting a harm reduction forum on the site could help addicts and others expressing an interest in self-harm. Years earlier, Curtis earned his EMT license and worked as a volunteer on an ambulance.
And I wanted to help people that had questions, because I have a medical background, and to help them if they wanted to commit suicide, or they were wanting to think about doing drugs. I would steer them away from it.
At the time in 2011, the creator of Silk Road wasn't known, but there was a function to send a message to the site administrator. So Curtis reached out to the admin and brought up the idea of starting a harm reduction forum.
And I said, hey, I think this would be a great idea. And he thought it was awesome. He thought, oh yeah, we definitely need that. And then he says, oh, by the way, you're going to moderate it. So that's basically how I got involved with Silk Road. It was basically to help people with their issues.
The Silk Road administrator set up Curtis as the moderator of this forum, giving him more access to the site than general visitors. But Curtis couldn't have known that by taking on this role, his life was about to change forever. Before it was all done, federal agents would raid his home, torture him, fake his death, and framed him for a crime that threatened to put him in prison for life. And at the bottom of it all was a little thing called Bitcoin.
It's a certifiable, one-stop shop for illegal drugs that represents the most brazen attempt to peddle drugs online that we have ever seen. It's more brazen than anything else by light years.
Coming up in part 2 of Crypto.
And that's the night he went and stole all the money and tried to blame me for it. It was 25,000 Bitcoins. Today it would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Silk Road was a marginal company. Why did they target it? Because Wall Street wanted to destroy Bitcoin before it could get big enough to compete for them, because a lot of people don't want to have to deal with central bankers.
And I think it's political, and I think it's also about the Bitcoin. And in fact, the NSA was urgently targeting Bitcoin users a few months before the Silk Road was taken down and Ross was arrested.
The Chinese now use Bitcoin to get money in and out of the country that they can't otherwise get in and out. The same thing with the Koreans. And the real question becomes, is this like armies? It's illegal to have a private army in the United States. Should it be illegal to have private money?
Red Pilled America is an iHeartRadio original podcast. It's owned and produced by Patrick Corelchi and me, Adriana Cortez of Informed Ventures. Now you can get ad-free access to our entire archive of episodes by becoming a Backstage subscriber. To subscribe, visit redpilledamerica.com and click Join in the top menu. That's redpilledamerica.com and click Join in the top menu. Thanks for listening.